Welcome to Creating Volunteer Positions that Appeal and Engage. Volunteer positions and position descriptions serve as a comprehensive overview for each volunteer role at your organization. However, before we write down a single detail, it's important to first spend some time thinking about how a volunteer position is designed in order to make sure that it's interesting and engaging, and that it's one that will appeal to potential volunteers. During this webinar, we're going to discuss how to craft or redesign appealing volunteer positions so that you can recruit and keep the right volunteers for your organization. In this session, we'll take a look at several position description examples and give you opportunities to provide input for them. As I mentioned, I'm Andy King, Training Coordinator with AmeriCorps VISTA. Joining me today in support of this session are Robin Stegman and Rebecca Starr, both project specialists at our colleague organization, Campaign Consultation. You'll see us in the chat and the Q&A, hoping to help you get your questions answered and provide you with technical support. Let's take a quick look at what we're going to cover in this session. We'll start by taking a look at what is a volunteer position. Then we'll talk about how we can design volunteer positions so that they're appealing. We'll look at some real-world examples of volunteer positions that are potentially engaging for volunteers. And then we'll take a look at how we can revisit or redesign existing volunteer positions to make them a little bit better. We'll also hear from a current VISTA member who's serving in North Dakota as she shares some of her own experiences in designing and revisiting volunteer positions. And as I mentioned, we'll have time for questions and we'll talk about some next steps that you can implement. Now it's my pleasure to introduce today our presenter for this session. Erin Barnhart is an internationally recognized expert in domestic and international service and volunteer engagement. She currently serves as a graduate program director at IPSI's Masters in Arts International Development and Service program with Concordia University. Erin also teaches graduate and undergraduate courses as an adjunct professor at Concordia, as well as the University of Oregon, and also leads courses on volunteer mobilization for the VISTA Blend. She serves on the board of directors for the Building Bridges Coalition and Volunteer Positive, and she's also on other advisory boards and boards of directors. She's a former Fulbright Scholar recipient and an AmeriCorps NCCC alum. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Erin Barnhart. Erin?
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for the introduction. It's my pleasure to be here today, and thank you for everyone's patience with our delayed start there. We have a lot of ground to cover today, and I hope that you will find it as exciting as I do. We're going to start off, before we dive into the content, with a little poll. And you'll see on your screen there's two questions, and there's also two polls that have popped up there. The first question is, have you ever created a volunteer position? And we'd love to hear from you that yes, you have, no, but you revised one, or no, you've never done either. Similarly, have you ever had difficulty retaining volunteers or recruiting for a particular role? So I'm going to give you just a few seconds to fill in that poll, and your responses are going to give us a little more information about what you have done before with volunteer positions. So I'm seeing responses come in. We've got, looks like quite a few folks have created one or more volunteer positions. That's great to hear. Several folks who have revised an existing position, and lots of folks who've never created or revised. So for those of you who have done this before, I hope that you're able to gather some new tips, some new tricks that you can bring to your craft. For those of you who have only revised before, this should hopefully give you some tools and strategies for creating new ones from scratch. And for those of whom this is brand new information, I hope that this is an introduction that sets you on the path to being able to craft engaging positions. As far as the difficulty retaining, looks like quite a few folks have said, yes, I've had difficulty with both retaining and recruiting for positions before. And then some as well, specifically with recruiting, some specifically with retaining. And the lucky 14% or so there have not had no trouble with either, which is fantastic. And I will have you guys do a webinar next on how you manage that, because that's brilliant. We're going to talk a little bit about what are some of the symptoms for why a position might be difficult to fill, or why you might be having a hard time retaining great volunteers. And then we'll talk about some tips and tricks that you can use to make it even more engaging, more accessible. So we'll go ahead and move on to our next slide here. Before we get into how to design a position, I wanted to very briefly touch on what a volunteer position description is. In short, it is the written overview of a volunteer position. The purpose of this is to capture a comprehensive snapshot of the volunteer role. I should be able to pick it up, read through it, and understand what does this person do, what are their tasks and responsibilities, where in the organization are they serving, for what purpose, who do they work with. It should be a one-stop shop of understanding that position. It also serves as an important recruitment tool. It provides a potential volunteer with a detailed overview so that they can self-determine, is this a good fit for me? Is this going to help me reach my own goals and motivations? Similarly, for the person doing the recruiting, it's easier for you to do your job of finding a good fit between volunteer interests and a position if you have a comprehensive understanding of what that position is. So why are they important? Well, they give you that outline. They give you a realistic understanding of the need or the opportunity that the position is designed to address. Again, the person doing the recruiting, it provides you with a great tool with which you can determine how to recruit, train, and support volunteers. Again, the more you know about the position, the more effectively you can find, engage, and retain the right people for the position. It helps those volunteers self-assess the fit. It serves also as an agreed-upon understanding of volunteer tasks and responsibilities, and that can be crucial once you have a volunteer on board so that you can come back to revisit it if there are questions or concerns or you're evaluating and making changes. Overall, it's similar to a job description that you've had before with a paid employment, only with a few key differences and additions, which we're going to discuss in just a few minutes. Before we do that, though, I also want to talk very briefly about how a volunteer position description differs from a recruitment message. In short, the volunteer position description serves as the what that can help you determine the how, where, and who to recruit. Similarly, from a volunteer's perspective, the position description is that next decision point after saying, yes, I think I want to get involved. It's their version. Looks like our slides are coming back there, so just hang with us. There we go. So the recruitment message's job is to draw in the intended audience. It's designed to capture attention and hopefully inspire to action potential volunteers in the community. And these messages are often informed by a specific position. Many of you on the call who have done recruitment before, you may have done that specifically for a role that you have in mind, and that helps you determine who your audience is and how you want to reach out to them. But this isn't always the case. Sometimes you're recruiting more broadly. You're looking for volunteers generally, and once they've said, yes, I want to get more involved, the position description is the next step in determining how. However, it's important to note, though, that volunteer position descriptions should not serve as the primary recruitment message. They're pretty much, in most cases, they're far too detailed, and they're not written in intentionally compelling language to serve that purpose. But they often accompany a recruitment message. So you might have a really great paragraph-long inspirational statement that inspires people to want to get involved. And in addition to reading that, they can also click on and open a position description that gives them all the nuts and bolts of that position. So it can also often accompany, but should not replace, the recruitment message. So think of that recruitment message as a way to pique someone's interest in getting involved, and the description as the comprehensive description of the many ways that they can do so. So let's talk very briefly about some of the key components of a position description. And the reason I'm talking about these now is that these will help you determine how to design a great role. First off, always include a brief description of the organization. This is both to put the position in context, as well as to ensure that if you send it out into the world as an attachment with a great recruitment message, but somehow it gets separated, someone who stumbles on it will know where to go. And what we don't want to happen is for someone to say, wow, this position is for me, but I have no idea who it's with. Second of all positions should have a title. Not only does this make this more compelling to a potential volunteer, especially those who might be seeking professional development opportunities through service, but it also demonstrates that this role is taken seriously. It's a formal part of the organizational team. The next piece is unfortunately often left off position descriptions, but it's pretty important. What is the purpose of this position? Why does your organization need a volunteer to do this work? And what impact will they have on your mission, your community? Volunteers can spend their valuable time contributing to one of potentially many different organizations in their community. They're likely drawn to yours because they care about what you do. They care about your mission. So help them understand why this role matters and how it will have an impact. And this is especially important for those roles that might be a little more behind the scenes or distanced from the direct service. So for example, helping with technology tasks or fundraising. It's not always as easy to see how they're impacting the population you're serving. So you want to help them understand that. Next, you want to list out the key activities, tasks, and responsibilities. Be sure to be honest. Include even those tasks that might not be so exciting. It's better for a potential volunteer to know all that this role might entail up front rather than for them to discover the less enticing parts of it after they've signed on. Next, you want to identify and catalog the required and preferred skills and qualifications. And this can be skills and qualifications tied to specific professions, like database administration or having a medical license. Or it can be broader personal and professional skills, like being a strong writer, having experience working with kids, or being CPR certified. For time commitment, you want to share how many hours you expect this position to require each week or month, when these hours typically take place. For example, is it usually in the evenings, weekends? Does it need to be during the business day? And how long you need for people to commit to a particular role. Again, don't shy away from making clear what you need here. It's important for potential candidates to understand what's required of the role before they decide whether they can and want to get involved. Site and supervision is where you want to include information like where they'll be working. For example, is it in an office? Is it outdoors? What the conditions are typically like there. Is it a particularly noisy office? Is it outdoors, rain or shine? That's especially important in the Pacific Northwest where I live. And who they will be reporting to and or partnering with. The next to last component is another critical piece that's often left off, and that's the benefits gained by volunteers. It's pretty rare for someone to want to be a volunteer for 100% altruistic reasons. Most people are seeking to do good things, yes, but they also might be looking for something personal or professional from the experience, whether that's an opportunity to meet others, have fun, spend more time outdoors, or to develop new professional skills, add to their resume, get experience in a field. These are all valid reasons to get involved, and they're most definitely not mutually exclusive with wanting to make a difference. So help potential volunteers understand what they can potentially gain or learn from engaging in this role. This will also encourage them to consider their motivations for getting involved and help them determine in advance if this role might fit the bill. And then last but not least, always include information on next steps. How can they contact you? What are the next steps for applying? So let's talk about, now that we've talked a bit about what that description is going to look like, let's back up and say, all right, how do I identify potential roles in the first place? There's a few different ways you can do this. First, as a member of the team at your organization, you can self-evaluate. Spend some time thinking about what are the needs and opportunities at your organization. You're likely already very familiar with existing gaps that might be there in terms of skill, time, or talent. And or you might have ideas for new projects and tasks that volunteers could take on. Spend some time brainstorming what you think volunteers could potentially do. Second, be sure to partner and communicate with staff members. Ask them what skills or perspectives they want or need, and ask them to brainstorm new roles or opportunities for volunteers. At the same time, be sure to ask them what, if any, tasks or responsibilities a volunteer might be able to assist them with so that they, the staff person, can try something new. This latter question is especially important for building positive volunteer-staff relationships, as sometimes staff members may feel like volunteers get all the fun and interesting stuff, and so they might not be so excited to work with them. They might also not be so willing to identify a task for a volunteer that they've been hoping to do themselves. So your job is to help them see how volunteers can be partners and collaborators for moving forward together, whether that's a volunteer taking on a new task or project, or them assisting the staff member so the staff member can take that on. Wherever possible, you want to offer a range of position types. These can be long-term and short-term. You can offer positions that can be done one time only or as they're available. You can offer roles that are advisory, where someone just takes a look at something you've crafted and says, here's what I suggest. You can look for specific skill sets. You can offer roles that are online. You can offer roles that are direct service, that are serving directly with the population or the environment that you are serving, or they can be more capacity building, behind the scenes, helping the organization be more effective. They can also be individual or group team positions. The latter can be a great way to make positions with a high level of responsibility or time commitment more accessible for people who don't have as much time as they'd like to contribute. Engages them as part of a group that's responsible for the task, thus allowing the individual members the opportunity to step forward or step back as needed, given other claims that pop up on their time and energy. Be sure to keep in mind the range of skills volunteers can bring, offering positions in both professionally skilled and non-skill specific categories. And where you have tasks that on their own just aren't very exciting, consider pairing them with something more engaging. For example, if you need someone to help stuff fundraising envelopes, you're probably going to have a tough time recruiting for that. However, if it's not the main task but is framed as just part of a role where their primary purpose is researching and writing grants, chances are you're going to have a better success rate. So think about where you can pair it with something that's a little more appealing. So speaking of appealing, let's talk about how we make volunteer positions appealing. We have some ideas of needs and opportunities. We have some key tasks and some skills that are needed. And now we need to figure out how to make a role sound exciting. So we're going to focus on 4 key strategies. And the first 2 are considering volunteer motivations and highlighting volunteer benefits. So first off, let's take a look at volunteer motivations. And this means starting off by thinking about who is our audience. Who are we reaching out to when we do volunteer recruitment? What audiences do we typically engage as volunteers? Examples could be college students, either generally or from specific departments. It could be parents. It could be retirees, working professionals, people who have been specifically impacted by or affected by the issue the organization is addressing, people who just care particularly about a specific cause or issue. Spend some time thinking about who you're trying to talk to. There's a common saying in marketing that says if you try to talk to everyone, you end up talking to no one. And that's very true. So as you're thinking about, I want to recruit for a position, think about who could be a particularly good fit, or who do I have access to that I want to see if this might be an appealing position for them. Once you have an idea of your audience, think about what motivates them. What might make it an appealing position to them given different motivations? How might someone in college be motivated differently than someone who's already working in their profession? How about someone who's more motivated by the mission than the skills they might gain? And then knowing the motivations of your audience, what does this role need to include to engage them? Are there specific tasks you could add to it, or responsibility opportunities you could add to it that makes it more appealing? What should you add or change to align with their motivations? Similarly, think about those benefits. What can they gain from this experience? Given your target audience, what benefits might appeal most? If someone is looking for professional experience, can you tie into it some way that they're partnering with different staff people at your organization so that they have that opportunity to learn from, connect with, and network with people in many different parts of the field? How can you make it a fun, educational, or inspirational role? Does the position you've designed provide opportunities to gain those benefits? These are just a few questions to ask so that you can craft a position that appeals to that audience. Moving on to the next one, we're going to take a look at, is it clear how there's the connection to the mission? Again, this is really important. People can volunteer their time anywhere, and increasingly people are feeling as though they have less and less leisure time. So they want to spend it wisely. They could volunteer their time with almost any organization. So you need to help them understand, A, why your organization is a good fit, and B, why it matters to the mission. They chose yours almost certainly because they care about what you do. So is it clear why this role matters? Can you answer the question of why a volunteer should consider doing it? And then make sure it's a comprehensive and realistic position. Go through those key components and make sure that all the details are included. Are you painting a realistic picture of the role, good and bad? Is it clear why the less appealing parts matter? Can someone accurately self-assess from the description whether they're interested or a good fit? So one last question to consider as you're thinking about how to make a position appealing. Would you consider doing this role? Would you ask friends or family to do it? And if the answer is or no, flat out, spend some time thinking about how can I make this more interesting? What can I add to it that makes it a little more exciting, or have more learning opportunity, or have more responsibility, or make it more accessible? Spend some time putting yourself in the shoes of a volunteer and thinking about, on paper, does this sound like a role that is going to appeal or engage someone who has particular interests that I'm reaching out to? So now I want to engage you guys in a brief exercise. We're going to look at 3 versions of a position description. Please note that in each one of these, I left off the organizational description on purpose, just in the interest of space. So using your chat window, what I want you to do is take a look at the position number 1, and I want you to consider how might you improve this. What's missing? What needs to be explained more fully? How could you make this more engaging? And go ahead and use your chat window there to call out some of the things you would do to make this a much more interesting position. Details, explain the tasks. Yeah, various tasks is pretty vague. I'm seeing a lot about the title. The title is volunteer. That's super boring. That is not something I want to put on my resume. Expectations, benefits. Why should they consider doing this? Talking about the specifics. How will this volunteer help? Who is Sarah? Great question. Who is Sarah? Why is this random person at the bottom? Why would this be fun and rewarding? Who will they be working with? What is the field in which they're doing this work? What is the mission of the organization? Yeah, you guys have great suggestions here. This position description is super vague. You're a volunteer. You're going to help with various tasks. You should have experience. Contact us. Not very engaging. It needs a lot more work. Are there specific needs like bilingual? Exactly. What kind of time is needed? What are the hours? What's the background of the organization? All right, let's look at version 2. So now I've done a few different things. We have a better title, a little more detail on tasks, some skill information, time commitment. I'm seeing much better, absolutely. But I'm guessing there's a few more things we can do. What else should we throw in here? What's the mission? Still need to know who Sarah is. Make it sound more fun. What's the organization? I love all the who is Sarah's. That's brilliant. Explain who the organization is. What kind of outreach? What does that mean? What are the benefits? What am I going to gain from doing this? Yeah, totally not a real email. Taylor Cook just nailed that. Don't email that address. That will not work. Where's the office located? Can I work remotely? What is meant by experience? Better formatting. How many days per week? Benefits and interesting approach. The skills are still pretty vague. Am I sharing duties? These are all excellent suggestions. This is a better position. I understand a little more what they're looking for, but it still could be a lot more information. All right, so we're going to try version 3. And version 3 is split over 2 pages, and I apologize for that, but on a piece of paper it would be 1 page. So on this version, we've got a title, we've got a purpose and impact statement. This is why this position matters. It designs effective communication to educate and engage the community. Crafting compelling messages captures the attention of community members and inspires them to act. This is the first one we've seen where, oh, it's telling me exactly what this position is for. Tasks and responsibilities, using some bullet points. I'm seeing in the comments there, people say, yeah, use the bullet points. I agree. It makes it easier to scan through and say, yeah, I want to do that. Yeah, I want to do that. I'm not sure about that. This volunteer gives you specific tasks and responsibilities of what you want to do. Easy to see what's going to be done. All right, so let's go to the next page of this one. That's okay. And then here you can see there's the skills again, required, preferred. The time commitment, a little more information. The site and supervision, who they're going to work with. You can work independently as well as at the organization. Volunteer benefits, focusing again on what sort of things are you going to gain from this experience. Again, so seeing lots of tips still. So this is a much better version, but could be even stronger. Having more, what exactly does experience with marketing and outreach mean? Who is Sarah? What is Sarah's role? Why am I emailing Sarah? Absolutely. She should have a title there. We need that information on the organization there. Make it sound more exciting. Still need how many days per week? More detail on the time commitment. You guys are good at this. I can see why several of you had not had trouble recruiting. So hopefully what you're seeing is just by adding more information, you're going to learn more about what this position is. Now it needs a little personality. It needs a little engaging. We need a way to help people connect with the role. And in some cases, it's going to be the recruitment message that does this, because the recruitment message is where you're going to use a lot of inspirational language. But standing alone, this should still be a good position of the position. So I'm saying more bullet points would be helpful. There's enough info given, but not too much. Excellent. Thank you so much for these suggestions. So at this point, I want to pause because I'm going to pass the mic over to my colleague Jordan Catcher. She's a current VISTA, and she is at the United Tribes Technical College Land Grant Program in Bismarck, North Dakota. And Jordan is going to talk a little bit about her own experiences and her own tips for success with crafting volunteer positions. And then we'll share a written example from another VISTA member after that. So Jordan, please feel free to tell us about your own experiences.
Thank you, Erin. So, hey everyone, my name is Jordan, and like Erin mentioned, I'm currently serving as the first TCU, which stands for Tribal Colleges and Universities VISTA, at United Tribes Technical College in Bismarck, North Dakota. So before I begin, I'd like to thank you all for your service and for participating in this webinar. So over the summer, I participated in the VISTA Blend online course entitled Volunteer Mobilization, which was led by Erin. And while this webinar was being created, Erin asked that I share with you all a few details about my experiences with creating a volunteer recruitment plan at United Tribes. So at the college, our land grant staff members have created 16 campus gardens. Some of them are super small, some of them are super huge, and they're all primarily maintained by the staff members. So once I arrived here in the end of April, one of my main assignments was to create a volunteer recruitment plan that would engage our students with maintaining our gardens. So throughout the online course, I highlighted on a few pointers to consider when developing or redeveloping volunteer position descriptions for your program. So number one, once you've familiarized yourself with your organization's mission, research your community. So try to figure out, like, where are you serving? Who is your targeted population for recruitment? You know, when I was thinking about United Tribes, I had to consider that while this is a college, most of the students are older and they have arrived with their families. I think around 3/4 of all of our students do have at least one child on campus. So that's definitely something to consider when thinking about what kind of positions I would be recruiting for at the college. You can try to find out where your community has volunteered in the past. You can either check out websites like volunteeringinamerica.gov, which give you detailed descriptions of people that are volunteering, sometimes in your city, in your state, compared to other regions. If you've already had a volunteer program, try to see, you know, where the volunteers have worked best, where they haven't, those kinds of things. If possible, determine ages, locations, family sizes. For my site, I had to consider the fact that most of these students left their reservations, some for the first time, and I knew that a strong connection to the college would provide the easiest transition for them, kind of feeling like a second home. It's difficult for a lot of students in general to leave home and come to a new college campus. So when thinking about the positions that I'd be making, I'd think, okay, well, if they were able to manage a garden, that would give them a closer connection to the campus that they're at. Things like that. And then become aware of the limitations of your community. Try to think about transportation issues, life commitments, family obligations, especially when thinking about the fact that most of my students have families. That's going to trump their volunteering time. So just being aware of those different kind of limitations. So for number two, be as detailed as possible in your position description. So try to cover as many angles as possible. Think of your description as a safety net that tries to cover as many what-ifs as possible. So what are your volunteers' responsibilities? How are they checked up on? Do they have to, you know, talk with a supervisor or another volunteer? How much time is required from the volunteer? What kind of dependability is there? A big one is, what are the consequences for not finishing an assignment? What might seem appropriate to you may not be appropriate for your community. So especially since I'm serving in a tribal college, it's a little different from non-tribal schools when dealing with consequences. So there's a really rather large support base here that strives to ensure that our students are successful as possible, and a lot of the times that means giving extra chances. So just being aware that, you know, if things do come up, knowing how to handle them beforehand can really save you a lot of trouble. Be realistic about the expectations of the position. So be positive, but don't sugarcoat it. My position description involves weeding and watering, sometimes on a weekly or a biweekly basis. So, I mean, it can be very repetitious and very tiresome. So when you're describing these tasks for your volunteer position, for myself, I explain that, okay, well, while these tasks may seem monotonous, you're ensuring the livelihood and beauty of your campus. You know, being real about it, but at the same time explaining why it's being done and why it's so significant to the volunteer and to the community. And then just ensuring that the potential volunteer is aware of those expectations. So when going over the description with a potential volunteer, not just skimming it, you know, not just saying, oh yeah, right, and you have to, you know, water and weed all the time, but making sure that when you read it, that they understand it and they know that that's one of their main responsibilities. And then tip number 3, consider having an incentive. Communicate the importance of the potential volunteer's description. So try to explain why it might matter to a potential volunteer. For my site, we're talking about gardens and food sovereignty. I chose to highlight on the fact that 16% of American Indians have type 2 diabetes, which is the highest out of any race in the nation. By referring to the diets and lifestyles of the past in relation to present day, a potential volunteer could understand that by maintaining a garden, ultimately they could be ensuring healthy lives for future generations. You know, trying to find different facts, different stories that can really appeal to the population that you're serving is very important. Highlight on the professional development skills acquired during service. I'm in a technical college, so you know, a lot of these students are going to be going out into the workforce, and you know, by highlighting on the skills that they'll be obtaining during their volunteer service, that'll really be a huge asset to when they go out and apply for outside jobs. And then also consider offering certificates, awards, professional references to volunteers that commit to a particular length of time. So, you know, to potentially avoid a volunteer dropping out early, I decided to offer certificates to those that completed at least 3 months of service. So this would give the volunteer a larger incentive to remain there longer instead of just volunteering for a few weeks. So I want to thank you guys for listening, and I hope that some of these tips were beneficial to you.
Thank you so much, Jordan. Jordan was great to have in the class, and it's such a pleasure to have her join us on the call and share her experiences. So thank you so much for that. On your screen now, you'll see we have another example of a position description, and this is another one that was developed by a current VISTA. And this, they use that sort of same format that I used earlier, talking about, also with a garden, coincidentally, a fundraising coordinator. So again, they have the purpose and impact statement of why this position matters, why it will move forward the mission of the organization. And we have the list of the tasks and responsibilities, research funding opportunities, create resources, attend events, recruit as needed. It also tells you a little more, again, about the skills, what's required, what do we absolutely need, and what might be great, but we're okay if we don't get it. What sort of time commitment? We have a typo in the time commitment. It talks about the skills again. That's okay. We'll fix that. Site and supervision, where it is, who they report to, the benefits, considerable resource development skills, grant writing, fundraising, recruitment, networking, great way to expand your network, credentials for careers, and contact information. So again, another real-world example of how you can put this into context. So before we move on, and I want to be cognizant of the time, I know we had a bit of a late start, but we are going to pause briefly to answer a few of the questions that have come up in the Q&A box, and Andy will let us know what some of those questions are.
Great. Thanks, Erin, and Jordan as well for your presentation so far, and thanks everyone who sent questions in. So let me just show a couple that we've got coming up. Early on, Erin, you talked a couple times about recruitment messages, and Lauren asks if you can define what you mean when you say recruitment message.
Oh, absolutely. Great question, Lauren. Sorry, I'm using terminology without defining it. That's a no-no for a facilitator. Yeah, so a recruitment message is typically maybe a paragraph, maybe just a few sentences, but it's the message that you might put on a poster or a flyer, or you might post it online, you might send it in an email. It's the primary text you're using to grab someone's attention. So when we, this call, we're not talking much about recruitment, but when you're doing an actual recruitment process, you would be thinking about who am I trying to talk to and where might I get their attention. And when you figure out where, then you'd think, okay, how do I post there? So it might be, I want to talk to shoppers at the organic food store, so I'm going to put flyers up. So I'm going to create a flyer, and on that flyer, the recruitment message is the text you're using to grab their attention. Similarly, it might be, I want to send an email out to students at a university to let them know about our organization, and the text you put in the email is your recruitment message. And the goal of that language is to, again, pique their interest. Say, usually it starts off with sort of an engaging statement of, you know, do you want to change the world, or something, you know, that's statistics-based in our community. 2 out of every 5 families are hungry, and whatever that might be, if you're grabbing their attention, and then you're telling them a bit about who you are, how they can get involved, and then the next step of how to do so. So that's a really brief description of what a recruitment message might be.
Great. Thank you, Erin. Julie asks, would you recommend having some sort of focus group or advisory panel of current or maybe potential volunteers to write position descriptions?
That's a great question. I think that could work really well depending on the panel. It can also make the process pretty tricky and difficult. So if it's a small group, or if you already have a good working relationship with them, I think that could be a really interesting way to engage their opinions on what's needed, especially because they're on the ground doing the work. Another way to approach that, if that seems like it might be a little too time intensive, is for you to take the first crack at it and then share it with your volunteers as an advisory council and say, all right, folks, here's what I came up with. What am I missing? What would you add? So I think there's a couple ways you could do that, but certainly the input from current volunteers and former volunteers could be invaluable.
Great. Jessica asks, do you have any statistics on the likelihood of an individual with a college degree, say a BA or an MA, to volunteer 5 or more hours a week with an organization?
That's a great question. I'm almost certain that there is that data existing on volunteeringinamerica.gov, or if you just Google Volunteering in America, and that is the Corporation for National and Community Service, with whom I'm sure everyone's already familiar. They release annual statistics on service in America, and I know that they do have educational statistics. I'm not sure if it's broken down by BA and MA, but typically they have, they correlate education to volunteer service. I'm also not sure if it will tell you how many hours per week. But I would spend some time on that website, and you can actually, it's a very malleable website. You can play with the statistics, so hopefully there should be more information for you there.
Terrific. Do we have time for one more?
Sure, go for it.
All right. So Minesh asks, one of the recurring issues I've had to face is volunteers who do not take their work seriously enough because of the general connotation that volunteer brings with it. While I, of course, do not want to deter potential recruits in position descriptions, what effective strategies would you advise on urging recruits and candidates to treat their work as professionally as possible?
That's such a great question. And it is unfortunate that for many people volunteer means, oh, I'm just going to help and I'll show up when I can, and you know, I don't have to go. It's not like it's a job. I think one of the ways that organizations have been successful and individuals have been successful with helping a volunteer to understand the importance of their role is first and foremost to make it very clear from the very first interaction. This position matters. Without you, here's what would happen. We need someone who's willing to commit to this work because of why it matters. I think sometimes volunteers have that attitude reinforced by an organization if they're not taken seriously, if they're not treated like a team member, if they don't have a clear understanding of why they should bother showing up. So you can include it from the very beginning of talking about why this position matters, what they will gain from it, and why they're needed. You can reinforce that by building relationships between that volunteer and other staff members so that they know, again, they're part of a team, as opposed to, oh, I'll just show up when I can. And I think that always sharing with them feedback on both on their role as well as the impact their role has is also critical to helping people understand that there is a correlation between their involvement and success and movement towards the mission. So those are a few of the tips that I have heard used in the field that have worked really well, is reinforcing and folding them into the team so that they understand it isn't just I'll show up when I can. It's, wow, it really matters that I show up. And if I don't, this doesn't move forward. So I think those are some of the things you might consider trying.
Great. Thanks, Erin. We do have other questions that have come in, and they continue to come in. But for the sake of time, I think we can move on, and then we'll have these other questions when we get to that next breaking point.
Perfect. Thank you. And please feel free to keep entering those questions, and we will have more time at the end. It might be right up to the wire, but we'll do our best. So I want to talk about revisiting positions. So you may have crafted something from scratch, but oftentimes you inherit a position, or there's one that's already there. And you may find that I'm having trouble recruiting for it, or I'm having trouble keeping people. So I want to talk first about what are some of the symptoms that there might be something wrong with a volunteer position. Some of the things you might realize about a position not being as appealing or engaging or as well crafted as it could be that you're having trouble finding people, either generally or specifically the right fit of skills and experiences. You may notice a lack of diversity among your candidates. Do all of your volunteers look the same or have the same skills and experience? Are you polling from the same pool of people over and over again? When you try to reach out to new audiences and new populations, are you receiving little or no response? Another symptom might be I'm engaging volunteers, but I'm not seeing great volunteer performance, or there's inconsistent outcomes. They're not able to meet the goals of the position or keep up with the responsibilities. And then lastly, a really good indicator is if you're having difficulty keeping or retaining volunteers, if you're able to find them but they just don't stay long. So what do we do about these situations? Well, sometimes the answer might be that we cast a wider net. We reach out to new and broader audiences, or become perhaps more strategically targeted until we reach out to. In many other situations, though, the solution may be that we need to go back to the drawing board with the design. We need to reconsider how we structured it, because it just may not be the best fit or the best design for the people we're working with. So when that's the case, what can we do to make sure our positions are accurate, accessible, appropriate, and most importantly, appealing to our audience? So there's a couple things we can do. First, we're going to think again about that idea of the audience. Spend some time thinking about what might motivate them to get involved. And think about those questions we asked earlier. How might someone who's in college be motivated differently than a working professional? Or someone who's motivated by the mission be motivated differently than the skills? And knowing this, what might you do to that position to change it? If you're working primarily with college students, but there isn't much opportunity for them to get professional growth, they're really sort of just pushing buttons or pushing papers around on a desk, that's probably not going to be very appealing. What we know about college students is that they're looking to launch their careers. They're looking to learn and to grow. So what can I add to this position that has an educational component, or an opportunity to maybe sit in on trainings, or to work with other staff members? What can I add to it or change about it that makes it more appealing for that audience? Similarly, revisit those benefits, thinking about, again, what do they want to gain from it? If they want professional experience, are they going to get it from this role? And if not, how can I change it? Think about the language and the terminology. What language is typically used in that field? Or how can a title be more compelling, especially for those who might be seeking to add experience to their resume? For example, if you plan to recruit volunteers to help identify great content for your social media, and you're recruiting primarily from a local university's marketing department, you might change a title that was marketing volunteer to something a little more engaging, like social media curator. You have freedom of creativity as license here to create what sounds interesting. So do that. Make it more exciting. When a position has been difficult to fill, spend some time thinking about the fit between the position and your ideal audience. Is this position as designed reasonable given who you typically engage? So for example, if you usually work with or you want to recruit more working parents, does a position that requires them to be in the office during working hours make sense? If the answer is no, how can you adjust it? Could you make it so that they can do more work from home? Could you make it so that it's something that they could do in the evenings? If you can't adjust it, what alternative audiences might you consider? For example, if you need volunteer mentors who can commit to 1 year of service, but you've been primarily working with college students who leave during the summers, who else could be a good fit? How can you make that fit well for people who are going to be there year-round? And if the barrier appears to be that you can't find someone with the right qualifications, can you offer training opportunities and make it clear to when you recruit that, hey, you can learn this on the job. Here's an opportunity for you to learn skills, and we'll train you how to do it because we need someone with the right fit. Also spend some time thinking about the time commitment. Are you asking too much given your audience? Is it simply too much work for one person to take on in a voluntary role? Are you seeking long-term folks, but you're getting more likely episodic? And if so, how can you redesign it? Can you make more of the role independent so that they can do it on evenings, weekends, at their leisure? And a lot of this means that you need to consider restructuring the position. So you might have a position that has lots of tasks and responsibilities and it's just too big. So you can break it into several roles that have smaller time commitment, smaller responsibility and task loads that you may have more success engaging people because it requires less of a time commitment, less of a responsibility commitment, and therefore they're willing to come on board. Alternatively, if you're having trouble recruiting for a role that just isn't very exciting, can you combine it with another that's more compelling? Again, thinking about that stuffing envelopes role. That's a simple task that won't take much time, but it's also pretty boring. How can I make it more interesting? And then thinking about that idea of the group or the team position. So where individual members can take a break and rely on one another to get the work done as needed. So we're going to look again at that volunteer position number 3, and I want to have you use your chat window. And just to let you know where we are with time, and we may run just a few minutes after, but it's going to be pretty close. In your chat window, I want you to take a look again at this position, and specifically looking at the tasks and the responsibilities. Let's say we were having trouble filling this role. How might we consider restructuring it? Could we combine it with another role, break it into smaller roles, make it a group or a team project so that it is more accessible and compelling? So taking a look at the tasks and the responsibilities, how might we split it or combine it or make team roles so that more people are able to consider this, or it's just simply more interesting? Look, it could be a social media person. Absolutely. You could have someone whose role is just doing the social media and someone else working on the other outreach pieces. Change the language, it's too repetitive. Yeah, make the language more engaging. Social media and print, specific task. Have one do the social media, one do the marketing. Different verbs to start each sentence. Yeah, we've got writing, writing, writing. Have a specific research role. Each bullet point could be a separate job, absolutely. Make it a team. Everyone works on the marketing tone together. Have a brainstorming team. Describe it more artistically. Tie in the mission to the purpose. Have it a more appealing title than marketing assistant. Is the research and development position. Have the position specifically for graphic design. Explain early childhood wellness. Make it clear to the person who's reading this position, oh, this is why this matters. Create a group. So a friend might join in because they can work together. Show the quantifiable impact. Pair it with a more interesting position. These are awesome suggestions. I mean, we could even break it down so that the social media, one position is just managing Facebook, and one is just managing Twitter. Managing anyone who does social media in their professional capacity knows that they take a lot of time. So these could be broken down into many different positions. Talking about the benefits. Again, you have them go to events to pass out materials, create a media group. Awesome suggestions. So hopefully you can see here that you can take a position as written that looks pretty good, and someone who has a lot of time could probably fill this role. But if I had a hard time recruiting for this, or I found someone but they just couldn't stay because there's just too much, I can recraft this. I can break it into individual positions. I can make it a team position. I can revisit the language and make it more exciting, make it clearer how it's tied to the mission. There's a lot I can do with what is a relatively good, well-designed position already to make it even more appealing, even more accessible. So before we sign off, and I recognize we're at the top of the hour, and thank you for your patience. What's that? Oh, sorry about that. Okay, so we do have time. So additional stuff here. So we have job title, social consultant, make it a team position, change language to make it more appealing to young people, offer additional training in these areas. Again, excellent suggestions for how to take a position that exists and make it even more engaging. So I have some additional resources that I want to share with you. And you'll get a copy of these slides, so you don't need to scramble to write down this information. But these are 3 of my favorite sources for information on how to design a position. The first one is on Energize Inc., which is run by Susan Ellis, who is a bit of a guru in the field of volunteer engagement. Many of these sites, in fact, have lists of other resources. They're basically curated lists of content on each one of these topics. So for the Energize site, the top 2, one of them is specifically about how to design the role, and the second one is about recruitment, including thinking about motivation. So both of those include lots of online, most of them free, resources on how to do this work. The third one is from Volunteering England, which is the national body for volunteering in the UK, or rather in England specifically, I should say. And that's their curated list of how to create volunteer roles. And it's also a number of free online resources that can give you tools and suggestions for how to do this. Before we move on to questions, I also want to give you guys some next steps and homework. And it's optional homework, of course. There is no real homework. I don't expect you to email it to me. But I want you to practice creating a volunteer position from scratch. What needs or opportunities would you identify? Ask colleagues to identify potential volunteer positions. What is it that you would like for them to do? If you reach out to them, what would they identify? And again, keeping in mind that idea that not only are you asking them to come up with new projects, but also existing tasks that they do that a volunteer could take on so that they could try something new. Also take a look at your existing volunteer positions and think about some of the things we've just practiced. How might you make it more appealing? How could you take a look at a position and say, all right, I have a pretty good position here, but maybe I'm having trouble recruiting or maybe having trouble retaining. How can I split this into several roles? How can I combine it with other roles? How can I create teams? And teams are great for pretty much every demographic you're working with. College students, working professionals, parents, retirees. It also creates a social element for many people of working with and relying on one another. And again, thinking about that restructuring and redesigning piece. And the purpose for all of this is the more practice you get with these activities, the more easily you'll be able to design, curate, revise, and overall come up with some really compelling, engaging opportunities for volunteers to contribute to and partner with your organization. So I know we're going to go back to a question period. So I'm seeing some in the chat and also the Q&A. So we've got a bit of time here. So let's do some questions. And again, there's the screen there of how to ask a question. Sorry, go ahead, Andy.
Sure. Thank you, Erin. And yes, we are at the formal Q&A session. So as you know, in the bottom right corner of your screen, there is a Q&A feature. Please enter a question. And the more information you can put in a question, the better, because that's obviously all we have to go by. And Kathy, could you give our callers on the phone instructions for how they can ask a question by phone?
Yes, at this time, if you'd like to ask a question by phone, you may press *1. Please remember to unmute your phone and record your first and last name clearly when prompted. Once again, if you'd like to ask a question by phone, press *1.
Great. And while we're waiting for any questions by phone, we've got a lot of questions that have come in through the Q&A. And I'll preface this by saying there are a lot related to all sorts of aspects related to volunteer management. And a lot of them focus on recruitment, which is really not the topic of today's session. So we'll start by the ones that are most closely related to volunteer positions, and then as time permits, we'll go on to the others. So first up, Laura asks, she says, none of the examples that you showed have a description of the organization or its mission. Is that actually necessary for a position description?
That's a great question, Lauren. So I purposefully left that off on the slides for the interest of space. And the reason why it does matter is, again, that if you included that as an attachment that you sent out on an email, you want to make sure that if someone read it and it was separated somehow from that email, they'd know where to go back. So usually when you're distributing a full position description into the world, it's as an email or you've printed it out and attached it to something. So the reason you want that description on there is in case it gets separated. Once it's at the organization, or if it's just something you're keeping just in your notebook at your office, then not necessarily. But anytime you're sharing it out into the world, you want to make sure that's there.
Great, thanks. We had a couple of related questions from Kyle and Mia. And the question is, how can we make volunteering more appealing to a rural community or to targeted populations, say a particular neighborhood or age groups or other particular targeted groups?
Great question. So for one thing, I'm going to refer back to what Jordan was talking about earlier, which is, getting to know your neighborhood and getting to know your audience. Consider using a website like Volunteering in America because they've got lots of demographic information. Now, admittedly, a lot of it is city and or state focused, but you can pull some of that state information to understand your community. And you also want to spend some time thinking about what those motivations might be for people who are volunteering. And some things are relatively universal. One of the reasons why we know parents are very frequent volunteers is that they're often volunteering with things that are related to their children. In a rural community, you have a pretty small, focused community, so wherever you can take the issue your organization works on and drill it down to a local level. We're working on hunger issues that affect our neighborhood, our community, and making that really clear in the language that you use. Help them understand that it isn't that they're working on some big idea that happens somewhere else, but it's local. It's something that's occurring in their neighborhoods, in their communities. One of the interesting statistics that came out this year on that Volunteering in America site was related to how volunteers or how individuals who volunteer then go on to use that experience as part of their striving for employment, what the link is between volunteer service and employment. And if you go on the site, there's a great graphic there that actually shows that, and I'm going to get this statistic wrong, so I want to refer you to it as opposed to quoting it. But there was the strongest correlation was specifically people in rural communities volunteering that then influenced their ability to find paid work. So for many people in rural communities, particularly where the economy might be a bit depressed, volunteering is a really terrific way to learn new skills, develop new skills, keep their skills sharp, try something new, explore new careers. It's important not to frame that as, hey, come get a job with us by volunteering first, because we don't want to make those promises. But it can be a really accessible, free for them, opportunity to develop skills that looks great on a resume, that gets them another potential reference to speak to their abilities, and it's something that they can also give back to their home community at the same time. So I think a lot of that, as far as how you make that appealing and engaging, is make it local, tie it to what's happening locally, ask them questions. If you can refer back to, hey, we talked to community members and this is what they care about, here's what we're doing, can you help us do it? And then also make sure that you're being very clear on what the benefits are for them, again, keeping in mind what are the needs of the rural community.
Great. Kathy, do we have any questions that have come in over the phone lines?
No, there are no questions in the phone queue.
Okay. So just a reminder, if you are on the phone and you want to ask a question, you may dial *1. Record your name when prompted, and Kathy will queue up your call. So while we're waiting for others, we've got plenty here in the Q&A. Alicia asks, in volunteer descriptions or in putting one together, how do you let people know that they will need to do a background check? How would you explain the need?
That's a great question, and that's an important one that when we're talking about making very clear what the expectations are of the role, that includes to letting them know that that's an expectation. There's a couple ways you can do that. One, you can put it in the volunteer position description itself, particularly under, you can put it in two places. You could put it under the required skills. It's not technically a skill, but when they're looking at these are the things that are required, you might mention, in addition to these skills, it is required that applicants pass a criminal background check, or however you frame that. But I would also put it in the next steps at the very end of contact this person for more information. The application process includes a mandatory background check. It is a great idea to include a little more information on why that matters. So you can even include just one sentence that might say, our organization works with vulnerable populations. To keep them and our volunteers safe, we do require criminal background checks. I think that's typically as far as you might need to go with the written. Once someone is interested in having a conversation, you can then give them even more detail. And you can explain to them how it's standard industry practice. It's when working with this particular population, or if you're in schools or whatever that might be, that this is our policy. Anytime you can refer back to policy, it's going to be better, because then people don't feel targeted. You can make it clear that we require it of all volunteers, or we require it of all volunteers who do this type of role. For some organizations, you might require a background check for a role that doesn't have direct client interaction, and sometimes people are confused by that. So that's where you just want to say, this is just what we require of everyone. It's part of our policy for keeping everyone safe. Another thing that I've learned, and especially from people in the field that has worked well, is some people feel a bit defensive when you ask for a criminal background check. They're saying, hey, I want to do good work. Why are you treating me like I'm a criminal? And you can frame it as letting them know that this is to protect our clients, but it's also to protect you. Part of our societal inclination is that we need to have these checks and balances. And we want to make sure that if there were ever a situation where someone were to say, you know, I don't know this person, I don't trust their background, we're able to say, no, actually we vetted them using this particular tool. So helping them understand that it's also to protect their rights and their background as well is a way to help frame that, so that, and again, always just letting them know it's not that we think you're a criminal, it's that we take safety seriously and we take risk management seriously, and part of the way that we do that is that we require everyone to do this. But again, anytime it's based in your policies, and then just explain to them that it's ultimately it's about safety. It's not about accusation, it's about keeping everyone safe.
Thanks for that, Erin. Kathy, do we have anybody on the line?
No questions in the phone queue.
Okay. All right, then we'll proceed. Keisha asks, volunteers are often thought of as short-term. How do you create long-term positions within a small organization that often has many tasks which are needed?
Sorry, could you read that one more time, Andy?
Sure. She says, oftentimes, and I'm guessing this is true at her organization, volunteers are often thought of as short-term. How could you create long-term positions within a small organization that often has many tasks which need to be accomplished?
So I think there's a couple of approaches you can take with that. You can create it, so the reason I'm clarifying the question is the concern how to bring staff members on board with the idea of long-term. Is it how to create the long-term roles themselves, or how to recruit for long-term roles? So I'll just answer sort of generally. With long-term positions, I think what you can do is just really focus on and highlight the importance of the role and the consistency of the role. For example, mentoring organizations, for people who are recruited to volunteer as a mentor, as a field standard, there's typically at least a 6 to 9 month commitment. And there are very good reasons for that. You don't want someone doing short-term or one-time mentoring for a position like that, especially when they're working with vulnerable youth who might be at risk in some way. You want the children and the young people to be able to trust them and build a relationship, and a one-time position doesn't do that. So what mentoring organizations do is they make very clear why it's long-term, why that matters. And you can do this similarly with your organization. You might be able to take a list of tasks and responsibilities and say, okay, yeah, people often think of these as short-term, but imagine if we had consistency. Imagine if we recruited for someone who could do this role over time, and they could expand on it. We could work with them as a partnership, have them evaluate, does this work? What else could we do? We could look for someone who has a specific skill set or wants a specific skill set. Again, college students are a great example for long-term positions, that they're looking for that opportunity to learn and grow in a particular role. So you could take those tasks and responsibilities, bundle them together in some way, and just as you would design a paid job position, which are by their very nature almost always long-term or intended to be long-term, do this for a volunteer position of how would I create a member of the team, a position that's a member of the team that is responsible for these positions, provides consistency. We're seeking someone who's going to work closely with us to craft it, to do this work, to continue to change the work. And I think that's one of the approaches you can take to craft that type of position. Recruiting for it, you just want to be very clear why it's a long-term position. Again, that they explain it well with mentoring, so explain it well here. We want to be able to rely on someone. We want to have someone who's going to be our team member. We want someone who's going to work closely with us to move this mission forward. Again, always using that language and that clarity around why this position is designed the way it is and why that matters. I hope that helps. I know it's a little bit of a vague answer, but some clarity on the question would help as well.
Great, thanks for that. Megan says, my organization has been recruiting volunteers for 5 years without volunteer descriptions. Do you have any suggestions for an effective way to introduce and integrate this practice in my organization?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that is what a lot of folks end up doing is they inherit existing positions, but there's no written description of them. So one thing you might do is start from your own perspective of what you believe those positions are. You can use the template we've used here, some of the key components from the webinar today, and you can start to plug the information in. Then you could reach out to who are the staff members that those volunteers primarily work with, have them fill in some of the gaps. address some of the things that you might have incorrect. You can share it with the volunteer and say, hey, it isn't that I'm trying to make sure that you do your job so much as I want to make sure I understand what you do. So can you take a look at this and let me know, what did I miss? What are some of the things that you do for us in this important position, and I want to make sure we capture that. You can frame it as, sometimes people will feel like, oh, this is busy work, why are we doing it? Well, don't frame it as, hey, I have to have these position descriptions, which, you know, is also perfectly valid, but frame it as, I want to make sure I understand fully the position so that should I need to recruit for another person down the road, I know how to do it. I also want to make sure I understand what sort of support volunteers might need, what kind of training they might need, and again, having this written description helps me understand it. And then it's a useful tool for evaluation and supervision so that you can say, hey everybody, we're doing this great work and I want to continue doing this great work, but let's make sure we're all on the same page with what the role consists of. So for my own education, I want to run this by you. Does this look right? And then it can become a tool with which you can continue those conversations going forward. So I would say start the work yourself. Sometimes the resistance you might get is just because no one wants to take that on. So if you can start it yourself and then ask people to plug in what's missing or give feedback, that's a pretty useful way to pull something together relatively quickly. And then it can be just something that you keep updated. And if no one else wants to use it, it's at least a tool that you have. And I suspect that they will find it very useful should they need to recruit for that position and or reevaluate the fit for a position down the road.
Great. Next up, Doug asks, he says, if there's a concrete goal at the end of, say, the task or the term of service, like an award or something, should we include that on the volunteer position description?
That's a great question. I think it depends on what it is. So for example, for some people, they're specifically say in their volunteer position that upon successful completion of 60 hours of service, volunteers receive a letter of recommendation or something like that, where that's something that's tied to their motivation or to the benefits they might be seeking. In those cases, I think you absolutely should go ahead and list it, especially because the volunteer position description, at least at the beginning, is the opportunity for someone to read through and think, is this the right fit for me? So if you're offering some type of award or distinction or professional opportunity that is appealing and may serve as a recruitment tool, absolutely list it. If it's something that, we throw a recognition party every year, you might list that as well, especially because some people are motivated by doing something fun. If it's something more along the lines of, yeah, we give mugs to people at a certain time, or there are T-shirts and sweatshirts. In some cases, it might be worth listing. Certainly there are event positions where, hey, I just need people to show up on a Saturday, and if you show up and volunteer 4 hours, you get a T-shirt. That's worth listing. If it's a long-term position and it's just sort of something along they're going to be thanked, it's going to be part of the gratitude shown is that we'll give them a mug. Maybe not, maybe you don't need to list it because it's not going to be something that's compelling enough or appealing enough to inspire them to get involved. So I think I would use that as the metric. Is it something that you think might tip them over the edge or compel them in some way to consider this position because it's tied to their motivations, their benefits, or it's just something that is particularly interesting and fun? If it's something that's a little more tangential to the other benefits they're going to gain, then I don't think you need to list it.
Okay, great. And Kathy, let's check one more time to see if anyone is coming on the phone line.
There are no questions on the phone lines.
Okay, great, thanks. So we'll continue with our online questions. Megan asks, if you are trying to reach a wide range of volunteers, do you suggest creating multiple volunteer position descriptions or just multiple recruitment messages?
That's an excellent question. I would suggest the latter. I would go ahead and create one position description. And what you can do is for those areas where you were talking about the benefits, you can list all of them. And because this isn't your primary recruitment tool, it's okay if it's a little longer. So you might include the benefits that might appeal to various audiences in your one description. And then you can create a number of different messages that might share a lot of the same core content, but might emphasize slightly different elements for a different audience. You might think about it in terms of if anyone's familiar with the idea of a master resume. The master resume is the one big resume where you list everything you've ever done and every skill set and every task you've done, and it's usually way too long and way too comprehensive. But what you do with that is you take it apart and you put it back together for any particular position you apply for, and you emphasize and highlight the things that matter most to that position. The position description in this case isn't the master resume. Well, is the master resume in the sense that you're going to include a lot of information, and the volunteer recruitment message is where you get specific. So I recognize I'm mixing my metaphors a little there, and I hope that's not confusing. In short, think about keeping the volunteer position description relatively stable. You'll certainly revise it over time as the position itself changes, but it's going to be the accompanying piece to the recruitment message, which is really where you're tailoring your message and targeting your audience. And that's really what it's designed to do. It's designed to capture their attention and inspire them to look at the position. So use that message as the shapeshifter in that scenario.
All right, next up, Anna asks if you could define what you mean by smaller time periods. And I think this goes back to when you were looking at some of the examples, and you offered a potential suggestion is to maybe break the tasks up into smaller. So could you talk a little bit more about what smaller looks like?
Sure. So smaller time periods, it might be that what you were looking for was someone for 15 hours a week. We'll use that marketing example again. I was looking for someone for 15 hours a week to do a number of different marketing tasks. Well, let's say I work full-time, and 15 hours a week is a really big ask. I'd love to help. I want to develop this skill set. I'm passionate about social media, and I'm passionate about what the organization does, but I can't do 15 hours a week. As a volunteer coordinator, as the person responsible for recruiting and for designing this position, I might sit down and look at that position and say, okay, so 15 hours to do these 5 tasks. What if I split this into, I just need someone for 1 hour a week to come up with great stories and photos and things to share on Facebook. They're going to be our Facebook curator. Instead of needing one person to do all 15 tasks in all 15 hours, I might just want one person to do one piece of it for 1 hour a week. Suddenly now, as a full-time working person, I think I can do an hour a week. That's no problem. So what you've done is you've taken a position that has a pretty good-sized time commitment and something that thus may not make it as accessible to many people, and you've chopped it down into a smaller task that requires less time. Smaller time commitment might also mean in terms of longevity. It might be we need someone to help us design our marketing plan over 6 months. But there's other pieces of it that I don't have to stick around for 6 months. I might just need someone who could say, hey, can you help us do social media just for this event? It's next month, and there's going to be a blitz, and we're going to send lots of information out, and we need some people to just come help just with that. So that's a way where you could take that existing marketing position and say, all right, not everyone can commit 6 months, but maybe they can commit a month. Maybe they'd be willing to help out because there's a clear start and end date to that task. So that's another way you could take that concept of smaller time commitment and break it down into either shorter longevity, or you could break it down into fewer hours per week. And ultimately what that means is for many people it's more accessible, and they might be less nervous about saying yes.
Great. Andrea asks, how can I tailor a volunteer position description for busy professionals? For example, medical practitioners who are needed for a free clinic.
That's a great suggestion. So there's a couple things I think you can do. One is to emphasize, well, first of all, one of it is to design relatively short shifts if possible. If you have a free clinic once a month, maybe don't seek someone to do all 8 hours, but you might say, can we have a team of medical professionals who are going to join us, and they're going to do 2 to 3 hours each, and that way your ask seems a little more accessible. It could also be focusing on the benefits for them, which is not only will you contribute to our community and provide these clinical services for people who are in need, but it's an opportunity for you to use what you do in your practice in a new environment. There's a professional element to that that can be very appealing. An example of that also is accountants who primarily worked with multinational corporations. I've seen successful recruitment efforts where they say, take your accounting skills and apply them for a small NGO. And what that offers you as a professional is the opportunity to say on your resume, not only do I have an expertise in accounting, but I can apply it in multiple environments. So that's a way that you could frame that for the medical professional of, you primarily work in a private practice, now come do it in a public clinic. Add that experience to your resume. And then again, focusing on the need, tying it to the impact of, we need your expertise, here's why it matters, here's the impact of it, and here is a relatively small ask of 4 hours of your Saturday can drastically improve the health of members of our community. And if you can offer any statistics or any backup information to make that even stronger, that makes for a very compelling ask, because then ultimately what you're asking about is 4 hours for improved health. And that's important for them to help them see that, because their every day is helping to improve health, and they may not understand or see the direct connection between doing a clinic and what impact it'll have on their community. So if you can tie it to the larger community issues, if you can provide any statistics, and if you can make those roles and the time commitments of them in particular accessible, that might be a way to make that particularly appealing. Another way, one thing I want to add is an example I once learned from someone who was working with an NGO that built houses. And they had a volunteer come in who really wanted to help build houses, but his background was he was a retired urban planning professional. And the volunteer coordinator there said, oh man, I really want him to do urban planning. Why won't he do it? And the man didn't want to do urban planning. He just wanted to pick up a hammer. So one of the things we'd worked on together and figured out was, can we offer him an advisory role? He really doesn't want to do urban planning, but can I approach him as he's doing other tasks and say, hey, I know you don't want to do urban planning, but we came up with this plan. Would you mind just glancing it over and give us feedback? That's a much smaller ask than saying, will you take on our urban planning? You might be able to do the same with the medical professionals, of reaching out to some who say, yeah, I'm just too busy, and saying, I totally get it. This is how we've designed the clinic. Would you be willing just to glance at it and give us your feedback? And sometimes that is just the crack of the open door that might eventually lead to them becoming a more engaged volunteer.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. This one's kind of a big one, so I'm not sure how much you'll be able to address. But Jacob asks, how can you go about reforming volunteer roles without stepping on the toes of those that have created the roles? How should I go about changing these roles that have been in place for long periods of time? My organization is very set in its ways.
You are not alone, Jacob. That is a common phenomenon. I think there's a couple things you can do. I think the first and foremost is to have them at the table and practice some diplomacy in terms of how you approach this. So instead of approaching it, not that I'm suggesting that you're doing this, but instead of approaching it as, we need to reshape this, reframe it, throw it out, and start over, frame it in the context of, this is for my own edification. I want to learn and understand what this position looks like, so I want to ask questions, and I want to get it down on paper so I understand it. And then you can sort of very slowly suggest, oh, I noticed that we do this. I wondered what you thought about maybe adding this. And when you're doing it as asking questions and engaging the owners of this, the people who have ownership over it, it will likely be seen as less threatening than if you were to come to them and say, we should do it this way. Also, especially where you have long-term volunteers who have a lot of ownership over a position, and I've worked with many organizations who have this challenge, engaging them as architects as opposed to telling them how it will change can go a long way. You may very well still get resistance, and it may be the sort of thing that takes time to change as there is turnover and as people warm up to your suggestions. But I think coming to them to say, I really want to understand what it looks like now, offering a few small suggestions or things that could slowly shift it over time, as opposed to suggesting radical change, is often more accepted. And then sometimes as people start to see, oh, this new method kind of works, there may be more, it may be more amenable to larger changes. It also may be that with the existing positions, you make just very small suggestions, but you also might craft a whole new position out of the air and say, hey, I took a stab at creating something new that I think could work really well, and see if they're interested in it. And if they are, that might also open the door for them to say, oh, well, I like how you did that. Maybe we could also do that with these other positions. So I would say, try something out of scratch for yourself, just to practice it. But as far as the existing ones, it may be very slow change, and ask for lots of opinions. And even if the opinions are, no, you leave it alone, we like it the way it is, you can always still say, oh, hey, I had an idea I wanted to float by you, and have it always be coming from that idea of, would this be interesting? What about this? As opposed to, we should do this. That often goes a long way, because it hopefully keeps people out of that defensiveness role of, this is mine, don't touch it. I hope that helps. I know it's a challenging situation.
Great, thank you, Erin. It is. It's a big challenge, and as you mentioned, probably a common one. So thanks for the information you were able to provide. And thank you all for your questions and participation today. It's been a really active and great audience for this session. Unfortunately, it's all the time we have, and I know there were many questions we didn't get to, many questions related to recruitment and structuring a volunteer program and lots of other things. So I want to remind you, we will be following up by email with additional resources, some of the links that Aaron and Jordan shared. And so there's tons of information online, so we'll point you to that. We'll also provide you with a copy of the slides, and we will go through the chat and pull out what look to be useful information or suggestions that you have shared with your colleagues so we can share that with others. There is an evaluation poll that's open now. If you would please take a moment, tell us what you thought about today's session, and if you have ideas for how we could improve, let us know. And if you have ideas for future topics, we'd love to hear those as well. And while you're working on that, I want to tell you about our next webinar. It's coming up on September 10th, and it's called Helping SNAP Households Gain Self-Sufficiency Through Employment and Training. So many of you are probably familiar with food assistance through the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, but you may not be aware that USDA has other supports for needy families focused particularly around employment and training. So join us on September 10th for that session, and if not that one, then please check back to the VISTA campus on the webinars page to see our list of upcoming topics. So I want to again thank Dr. Erin Barnhart for all of her expertise on today's session, as well as Jordan Ketcher for joining us for today's presentation and sharing her experiences and tips. And thank you all for participating.